In this video, we're going to look at stamped concrete driveways from a couple of different perspectives, starting with design. And I'm here in a Novato neighborhood, and it's a good chance to illustrate how impactful a driveway is. So, coming up to this house, you can see the driveway dominates the view. Going to the next house, again, the driveway dominates the view. The reason for that is several-fold. The first is it's a flat plane, so the eye takes it in as a single object. It's often light, and so light colors draw the eye more than dark colors. And as a result, we're focusing on the worst part of the landscape in the home. There's nothing attractive about a fading driveway, often with cracks. But the big question is, since it does take up so much of the view, since it can dominate in terms of square footage the planting area, why not treat it as an aesthetic composition rather than as an afterthought? And there's a couple of ways to do that. I think one of the most important is shape. So when you get away from square angles and you create shapes that relate, in this case, this shape here is not only opening up to be a third parking area, it's also responding to this redwood. So you've got two relationships. It's also softening the house angles by taking square shapes into these curves. And most people appreciate designs that have a balance of angles and curves, a balance of formality and informality. So that's what we're doing here. Now, having looked at the shape, the next issue is the texture. And when you break up, one of the reasons that nature is so relaxing is it's a fractal pattern, meaning it's very simple. If you look out at this view here and you look at the natural part, which is the part way in the back, the natural part is the most peaceful. Here you have lots of busy angular shapes created by human beings. There again. But off in the distance, that ridge line of green is a very, very simple motif. It's just green, roundish mass with a beautiful monotone gradient blue on top. And it's very peaceful because on the one hand, you have variety. You have no little lump is exactly the same, but it's also a very simple theme. Now, that's what you get when you do stamped concrete, is every color gradient is very slightly different, but it's also very similar. It's all black, gray gradient. And the shapes, every shape is slightly different, but it's also a similar pattern. So you've got a balance of, on the continuum between boredom and chaos, between not noticing it and being overwhelmed with variety. The colors are the next thing. So you've got variation in texture, you've also got variation in color. That's restful on the eyes. It creates some interest, and I think that for a surface that's this big in a landscape, it deserves more attention than something like this, which is where we started. So in summary, from a design point of view, if something is going to take up this amount of space and dominate the eye, it deserves to be treated as an art piece rather than an afterthought. Now, the larger square joints are, as we move into technical subjects, the larger square joints that are deeper are called expansion joints, and what they're there for is you will always have cracks, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, maybe 30 years, but all concrete slabs will crack, particularly around trees. Now what we want to do is see that the cracks happen along these lines, and there's a very good chance that they will. This diagonal line there is consistent, so that if a root grows out in this area, it's very likely to form a very small hairline crack rather than ruin the pattern. So that's what they're there for. Now the other thing is whether or not to use rebar in the underlay. And my preference is to use fiber mesh. These are fiberglass strands that are mixed into the concrete and create strength from cracking in that way. Now I like that for a couple of different reasons. One is labor cost savings. The other is the reinforcement is in every couple of inches rather than just every couple of feet. The third is that I use broken concrete in retaining walls, and I'm always having to tear up these driveways, meaning there was a whole bunch of cracked, fading dark gray concrete in here, and I had to dig it all up. And rebar was luckily not in it, or it would have been a much more difficult job. Now, fiber mesh wasn't in it either, but I put fiber mesh in part because if anyone ever needs to do some repairs or replace a section or change the design, it's much easier to tear up than rebar. Now, going up the street, we're going to look at a couple of design details because the neighbors agreed that this was a vast improvement. And so we're just in the process of putting a similar but slightly different stamped concrete driveway in for them. And this gives a chance to talk a little bit about the process and logistics. So this is my excavator, and I'm the only one in the team that operates it because of its capacity to cause a lot of damage as well as speed things up dramatically. But this is the machine that I use to take up the old concrete. So in this case here, I removed the concrete in a day and a half, and the thumb here helps me pick up large pieces, put them in a waiting dump truck so that they can be hauled off. And the old concrete gets recycled into new road base. Now, when the concrete is being poured, in this case we poured all of this in one day and stamped. This can be done in the winter months. In the summer, the concrete dries too quickly, so you have to break it into smaller pieces. But one of the logistical questions is how do you get out of the house as a client? And so in this case, the client can come out the side here and jump over this little path when it's wet. But sometimes you need to break it into several pours because you can't walk on fresh concrete for 24 hours. And so one day you might come out of the garage, and then the next day, when that's hardened, come out of the front door. That would be an example of a multi-day pour in order to allow you access to the house. Now, stamped concrete has two colors. There's a base color, which is the color that the cement arrives in. So you can add a color that mixed in the cement. But what you're seeing here is this is called dark gray concrete release. And this is a powder that the stamping crew puts on top of the concrete so that when they're pressing their rubber forms down in the concrete at just the right moment, it pushes a second color. So if you look in here, you can see the two-tone effect. Now this driveway is lighter than the driveway down the street at the client's request. And you can see how significant the sealer is. The sealer will help you preserve your color. It will also help you preserve your concrete. And so this is a semi-gloss sealer. Down the street we used a high gloss sealer. Again, that's a client preference. But we're a couple of days after concrete pouring, and we're using the time when the concrete is clean, dry, and on a sunny March day to apply the sealer. Now, you cannot walk on the sealer also for 24 hours. Now, it's worth noting that in order to get the powder, the leftover powder, off of the concrete, first we'll sweep it to get most of it off. Then the last bits come off with a blower. And that creates a big dust cloud of this gray powder. Now, in a house like this, that's not an issue. It fades in very easily. But on, for example, a white marble house, which was our last driveway, it's a big deal to get, a gray dust on white marble, that can stain and stuff. And so we have to put up more plastic. At this point, the excavator is here just to block traffic so no one can drive on the driveway, because it has to be avoided for vehicles for 7 days, although you can walk on it within 24 hours. We're going to again do half of the sealer roughly today, and then tomorrow when we begin the other half, they'll be able to walk on this part of the sealer. And so that is the process, the technical aspects, and the aesthetic considerations for a stamped concrete driveway. And as a designer, the way that I look at it is that a stamped concrete driveway with good colors and nice lines is a 300 to 400% aesthetic improvement to a home. It adds dramatically to curb appeal, resale value. It's also much lower maintenance than a paver driveway. I might stop and show you the issue of a paver driveway. And the issue in pavers in a driveway down the road are these little weeds and mosses that can fill in because there's no concrete connecting them. And so while pavers can look as nice as stamped concrete initially, all the plant growth makes them higher maintenance and less attractive over time. Time is also one of the other reasons to do stamped rather than pavers from another angle, which is you can pour a stamped driveway in as little as a day, but it can take considerably longer to arrange and lay down all of the separate pavers. And because pavers are typically laid in sand, the concrete is a little bit more strong when large trucks are driving on it, so you won't see little dips where the trucks drove even in wet weather. In conclusion, stamped concrete is the fastest, most cost-effective way to get a 300 to 450% aesthetic improvement, allowing you to simultaneously introduce beautiful lines and texture and color. It is the lowest maintenance, and as a designer, I'm always looking at return on investment. So stamped concrete would not be particularly impressive in my eyes if it cost 400% more than other options and looked 400% nicer. That's an equal return on investment. But while stamped concrete is twice the cost of a traditional driveway, its 400 to 500% aesthetic improvement makes it an incredibly good value. Much of the sale of a home is determined by the emotional impact of a buyer in the first 30 seconds driving up. And a stamped concrete driveway can add a 300% positive emotional impact to that first drive up, that first curb appeal, which sets the stage for the entire home being viewed in a more attractive way.